Hi, everybody. This is Lowell, and we're talking about music theory. And so we just did a segment about rhythm, and so now we're going to talk about melody. And so there's three main aspects of making music and or building music, and that is rhythm, harmony, and melody. And so we're going into a segment to talk about melody now. And in order to understand melody, you really have to understand intervals and what is an interval. And what, in order to talk about the subject of intervals, you really have to talk about the subject of tuning. In Western culture, we have come to know music based upon a system that was designed around the time of J.S. Bach, and it's called equal temperament. And before that time, you would have people that would study uh, music theory from the standpoint of harmonically based tuning systems. And so, for example, you would have a harpsichord, which is a very early form of piano, and a harpsichord would be tuned to have the entire instrument tuned to basically one key, to where if it was tuned to the key of D major, then every note, all of the different chromaticisms and so forth, would be tuned to where the key of D major sounded resonant and successful. But then if you were to go into the key of some other key other than D that was far away from it, something like a tritone away from D, say A flat, then all those notes in, if you were to make a harmonic area in the key of E flat, of A flat, it would sound totally out of tune. And guitar players will understand this. If you tune your instrument to sound really good in the key of E, say, then if you're playing in some other key that's not that's kind of separate from harmonically separate from the key of E, that the strings don't resonate well. They don't sound as good as they do in the key of E. And that's kind of what I'm talking about in a large scale. So equal temperament sought to fix that problem. In other words, they, instead of making all the notes resonate perfectly in one key, they kind of fudged the notes to be more equally spaced, to where it didn't sound fantastically resonant in one key or another, but it allowed the composer to be able to transition from one key to the other without it sounding like things are really good in one key and then sounding really bad in another key. So it made it easy to transition and to modulate from like using the example above, or that I said a minute ago, the key of D major to A flat major. If you made that transition as a composer in your piece of music, then it wouldn't sound just totally off kilter and non-resonant. So that's how the equal temperament came to be. So each note was equally spaced. And so from that system, all of the music that we understand today in our modern ear has come from equal temperament tuning. And many other tuning systems throughout the world are not built that way. They're built on the overtone series, and it sounds out of tune to our ear in our Western culture, but it's actually in tune in terms of the harmonic series in other cultures. So I wanted to talk about intervals because we're talking about equal temperament. The intervals that we're going to show you are consistent, whether it be in a low octave or a high octave or a middle range octave. The intervals remain consistent because we're talking about equal temperament. In a harmonic series based tuning system, that would not be the case. But so if in classical music theory, and really, which is the foundation of all music theory in our Western world, throughout all styles, jazz, rock, all of it, the concepts that I'm going to show you just within one octave are equally dispersed throughout all octaves. So here's a little keyboard that is going to show you intervals. Probably the best way of showing you of what I'm talking about is to divide scales into two different types of scaling, which is called, one is called diatonic and the other is called chromatic. And so diatonic is, dia meaning day, the days of the week, how many days of the week do we have? We have 7. And so there's basically a major scale is what is in our ears. And so a major scale is we can do this in C major easily. So notice that I've skipped the black notes, and adding the black notes in creates what we call chromaticism. And so there's 7 notes in a diatonic scale, but then there's 12 notes in a chromatic scale. And so here's the 12 notes. So because we're dealing with the diatonic notes inside of the subject of the chromatic notes, I'm going to discuss intervals from the standpoint of chromatic notes. And I kind of shift around here so you can see the keyboard a little better. And these are the major building blocks of melody. And so I'm going to talk about these in terms of chromaticism. And the first interval that we're talking about, I'm going to shift the octave up here. The first interval we're going to talk about is the minor second. And so that's the smallest interval we have. And so from C to C sharp or D flat, that's the smallest interval. And so that interval right there is called a minor second. And then the next interval is called a major second. That's the next largest. And then the next is a minor third. And that's this. And so a minor third consists of 1, 2, 3 minor seconds. So the building blocks of all of these, you can put it into the category of minor seconds and major seconds. And another way of saying that is half steps and whole steps. And so a minor third consists of 3 half steps. So another way of thinking about intervals is not necessarily the notes, but it's the space between the notes. In other words, it's the cracks between the notes. So how many cracks do we see here? There's 1, 2, 3 cracks between this note and this note. And so that's another way of saying how many half steps there are to create a minor third. And so a major third has 4 half steps. So here's a major third. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, or that's 4 half steps. And then a perfect fourth is this. And then a augmented fourth is this. And then a perfect fifth. And then a minor sixth. A major sixth. A minor seventh. A major seventh. And then a perfect octave. So those are the key intervals and building blocks of melody. Now we're going to talk about intervals later in terms of harmony and the way triads are built and the way in jazz, how jazz chording works of stacking thirds. But for the sake of melody, I wanted to talk about establishing these the patterns of understanding in chromaticism all of these different types of intervals. And of course, you can start on any note. It doesn't have to be C. It could be G. So a minor second from G is this. Major second, minor third, major third, perfect fourth. It's all the same. So intervallic relationships can be centered on any note, any of these 12 notes. So understanding what I just told you is important from the standpoint of how melodies are built and how thematic development is developed. And I keep using the example of Beethoven's Fifth. And so the rhythmically is one thing. We talked about the rhythm motivic development in the previous segment of what Beethoven did in that opening. But here's the intervallic use that he. So that is a major third, and then here is the same pattern, and yet it's a minor third, and then a minor second, and then a minor third, and then a perfect fourth, and then a minor second, and then a minor third, and then scalar and a perfect fifth. And so these intervals that he uses, and particularly in that sequence, come into the rest of the piece. So a composer who's thinking in terms of building the a well-developed theme throughout the rest of his composition is going to take those intervals and use them in sequence or in augmentation or diminution, and we'll get more into motivic development. I a couple years ago finished writing my first symphony, and the entire work is built on basically these two intervals, the minor second, and then the perfect fourth. And so taking those intervals and extrapolating them throughout the work and playing with them is what helped me build a half-hour-long composition in 4 movements. So motivic development in melody is particularly interesting and fun. And so it's about structure and it's about patterns. And so people hear and understand and perceive patterns, whether or not they're, actually aware of it, but audiences will hear patterns, and to them, it seems like it's congruent. It seems like it makes sense. As humans, we pick up on patterns. If you ever walked into a room and it's like you go, wow, something doesn't feel right here, or there's some problem in here. Or you walk into a crowd and you go, wow, it's like there's a nice feeling here among the people. You don't know why you're sensing those things, but you're sensing patterns. Your brain is picking up on pattern awareness. And so the same thing in musical composition is when you're dealing with creative patterns that are well crafted, then the listener is aware and picks up on the congruity of that, and it brings a sense of wholeness. It brings a sense of unity, of high craftsmanship, when everything is brought into thematic unity. So I'm going to talk a little bit later about thematic development and what that looks like.